come interrupt my video. Here I am. Hi, video. Here comes Anna to interrupt my video for the second time. There's Anna.
It's your fault you messed it up the first time.
Yep.
So, thank you. Hi, video.
Hey, everybody. I'm trying to give you some information on your carbon cycles and how to move carbon throughout the system. I know it wasn't terribly clear over the last few days, so I wanted to help you out with some more insight. So here we go. Carbon cycles. So carbon, of course, moves, right? That's the whole point of the carbon cycle, is how it moves from one thing to another, both in and out of living things. So here's Chuck. He's our carbon atom. And like we said, Chuck moves. Chuck might move from the air into a plant, from the plant into another animal, from an animal that dies into the soil. You name it. It moves around over time. And what I'm trying to give you is some of the insight into the terms that we use to talk about Chuck's movement, and also a little bit about how you might set up your own tutorial. So again, where does he go? How does he move? Let's tell you here. So first of all, from the air into the biosphere is almost exclusively done by autotrophs or producers. The way that carbon comes out of the air and into the biosphere is through, of course, a process called photosynthesis. During photosynthesis, autotrophs or producers take carbon out of the air and use it to build up their bodies. This is photosynthesis and the primary way we get carbon out of the air. Once it's in the producer, there are several different paths that it can take. One thing that can happen is the producer itself can actually breathe. It can breathe the carbon back out into the air as it uses up the sugars in its body, and it can send the carbon back into the air. This is called respiration, and it's not unique to producers. All living things do respiration. It can also decompose. If the plant dies and goes into the soil, this carbon atom can get buried down in the soil. It can also be consumed by a primary consumer, where the carbon moves from the producer right into the body of that primary consumer. And finally, though this doesn't happen all that often, that same plant can actually burn, and this process is combustion, where the plant burns and it's released up into the air. Quit packing up. You have another, what do you have, 2 minutes?
3 minutes.
Dang it! Some paths that it can take from the consumer. This carbon that's in the consumer can go a couple of different ways as well. It can, of course, go out as the consumer breathes. This is, of course, respiration. Plants do it, animals do it, everybody breathes. And so this is a way that the organism can get the carbon back into the air. It can, of course, also die. And if it dies and decomposes in the soil, that carbon can get deposited deep down. And, of course, it can also get eaten by something else. Consumption can also happen, resulting in the carbon being moved into another consumer, this time a secondary consumer. It, of course, I guess, could also burn, and it could be combustion, but these are the three primary ways that we see movement of carbon out of consumers. Well, what happens to it when it's in the soil? What are ways that carbon that gets buried down in the soil can get released? Normally, carbon in the soil stays there for a very long time, but there are a couple of ways carbon can come out of the soil. It can certainly come out via combustion. When we burn fossil fuels, we release carbon back into the air, and this is why there's so much carbon in the air now, is because this process is happening a lot more. If it's not that deep, it can also, of course, leave via respiration, as little things like fungi and bacteria put it into the air. So, what's a carbon cycle look like? You can come up with any cycle you want as long as you understand the different ways things move around. But here's one potential cycle that you might use for your animation. So imagine we have a system like this where we have a lake and we have a producer. Carbon in the air could get into the producer via the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis would take it out of the air and put it in the body of the producer. Now from here, like we said, it could go any of 4 different ways, back into the air, into the soil. It can also go into a consumer. And so it goes into a consumer, say our giraffe here eats it. Now the carbon moves into that body of that consumer, and via the process of consumption. Again, from here, this consumer could die, and it could be decomposition. Another consumer could eat it. For our choice, we're going to have it go back into the air via respiration. So the plant breathes it out, and it goes into the air. From here, let's say it goes back into the system via photosynthesis, but this time in an aquatic system. So it goes back via photosynthesis into these little algae floating in this pond. From here, again, they could breathe it back out, they could die and decompose. We'll have it get consumed by a secondary consumer, a fish here, eating those little diatoms. via consumption. This producer could do a lot of different things. We're going to have it go and die. So if this consumer dies, it's decomposition as it goes into the soil. How does it get released from the soil? Well, again, combustion is probably the primary way, so we can talk about the combusting and releasing back into the air. So we could make an animation where our carbon goes through all of these different phases and ends up in these different spots. It's up to you how you build your cycle, but this is one idea that might work for you. Good luck, hope you enjoy it, and let us know if you need help.